Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. It is 1 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. We have an amazing opportunity to have the land acknowledgement acknowledged again, and we have the honor of having one of our own Native American students, Ms. Treasure Morgan, who is a part of our student equity team and a representative of our Native American students within our college. She is going to be reading that acknowledgement to us to start us off in the second half. So, Treasure, the floor is yours.
That's a Treasure Morgan initiative. Don't are totally initially not touching but just this not Jenny Deshanella. And that's just a little introduction of who I am and where I come from. And I'll be reading the land acknowledgement today. Colorado State University acknowledges with respect that the land we're on today is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and peoples. This was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for numerous other Native tribes. We recognize the Indigenous peoples as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it. As these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, the ties nations have to the traditional homelands are renewed and reaffirmed. CSU is founded as a land-grant institution, and we accept that our mission must encompass access to education and inclusion, and significantly that our founding came at a dire cost to Native nations and peoples whose land this university was built upon. This acknowledgement is the education and inclusion we must practice in recognizing our institutional history, responsibility, and commitment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Treasure, for sharing the land acknowledgement with us. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the College of Agricultural Sciences Come to the Table event. My name is Addie Elliott, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Assistant Dean for Academic Advising and Student Success. I'm so pleased to see so many students and colleagues joining us today. It's my honor to welcome and introduce our next two guests. First, I'd like to introduce Kristin Kirkpatrick, a very dear friend of mine and the Executive Director of Together We Grow, and celebrate this opportunity to learn about the growing need and demand for graduates with competencies in equity and inclusion practices within the agricultural industry. Kristin works tirelessly to bring diverse voices and opportunities together in the ag industry to create system-wide change around inclusion and equity. I'd also like to introduce Andrea Loudenbeck, a current master's student in the Animal Sciences Department. Andrea has graciously agreed to share a few of her own questions with Ms. Kirkpatrick and facilitate a question and answer opportunity with the audience after Kristin's presentation. Ms. Loudenbeck's research focuses on using mixed method approaches to assess the impact of climate change on Colorado's dairy systems. During her time at CSU, she has gained a special interest in social science and DEI work in the agricultural sector. She is part of the graduate student group that evaluates the need for increased DEI efforts in STEM graduate programs and DEI efforts in the Animal Sciences Department. Additionally, she wants to get involved in diversity and equity efforts within food systems and underrepresented agricultural communities. Thank you both in advance for sharing your time and enthusiasm today. I'm excited to learn alongside you. And with that, I'll pass the microphone over to Kristin. Thank you so much.
Addie, thank you so much. And thank you to the committee and Dean Pritchett, and of course, all of our amazing students for having me today. Every time that I start to feel overwhelmed about the work that we have before us, I just think about the students that we have, and it instantly makes me feel more hopeful about the future. One of the things that Addie and I share is that our daughters are best friends, And so in particular, when I think about the next generation, both of the students involved at CSU and future RAMs, perhaps, I feel really hopeful. So I want to start my comments today grounding us. I know you guys had a very inspiring morning. I feel very honored to be joining you. And before we get started thinking about how the industry is really pushing us forward, particularly as it comes to building cultures of inclusion and belonging, I want us all to think about our own selves. So I'm going to invite you to see why my computer doesn't want to be collaborating with me. Give me 1 second. And I am, let's see, why my screen is not allowing me to share with you to advance my slides. All right, here we go. So we're going to start with some visioning. I want you to think about why you got into this work. I want you to take a deep breath, maybe close your eyes. I'm going to shake off some of the stress from the meetings I had earlier today. And I want you to think about why you decided to get into this work. What inspired you to be on the journey that you're on, in your schooling, in your career, the aspirations that you held for deciding to jump into this work, the aspirations you're currently building for yourself, for your community, and for the larger world. I am having the most difficulty with my screen sharing, and I'm so sorry. I want you to think about your future. Maybe it's a couple of years out when you graduate. Maybe it's farther out and you have tenure. Maybe it's 10 years away when you think you might be in that dream spot in your career. Maybe you've retired and you are more focused on community. I want you to think really critically about what the world looks like, the opportunities that you see. What are the challenges? Within that future, what is the state of our social contract with one another? If you were to lean all the way in to the most ideal future that we could have, the most inclusive, the most productive, the most resilient, what does that future look like? What kind of leader are you in that future? How are you showing up in your organization? How are you showing up in your community? How are you showing up for yourself? And finally, I want you to come back into the present moment, to Thursday, February 4th, 2021. How far away does that ideal future feel from the reality of where we are today? Within our campus, within our college, within the university, within our cities, and the broader society. If you're like me, the gap between where I want us to be and where we are feels expansive. And I want you to think lastly about the kind of role you want to play as we seek to close that gap. So I'll start by answering a few of those questions for me. I was really inspired to do the work that I'm doing now for a couple of reasons. One is that I was raised by a social worker and a mailman. And I was raised very much with the sense that we live our lives in service to others, that we're industrious and we don't stop the work until the job is done. My mom, the social worker, really raised both my brother and I with this sense that our lives are in service to something bigger than ourselves. And so I've always thought to do work that feels unrealistic in some ways in terms of its ambition and the shifts that we're hoping to create. The things I care a lot about are systems. I'm a systems change thinker and have been really lucky to do that work in a number of really tricky systems. I've done work in transportation systems, helping to shift from planning cities for cars to planning cities for people. I've done that work in our food system at a local level and also at a national level, and working in education policy. And the work that we're currently involved in with Together We Grow, which involves both the food system, our education system, and then equity and opportunity when it comes to diversity and inclusion, really is centered on things that I care deeply about shifting, which is creating more opportunity, more shared power structures, and more economic opportunity for more people. And then my innate skills, the things that I'm really good at, I am a strategic, futurist, positive thinker. I care a lot about results and about doing more than just talking about things. I'm not who you want to be working on spreadsheets or or doing expense reports, but I really can see the opportunities in shifting our systems so that we have more equitable outcomes. And when I think about our future, we know that we have no end of challenges that face us. When I think about what the world looks like in 2050, we know that we have no end of challenges when it comes to climate impacts. We anticipate there might be as many as close to 10 billion people living on this earth. What that means in terms of available land and water and food security and migration patterns and supply chain resilience, those things are all going to be very stress test in the coming decades. I care a lot about that 2050 number for a handful of reasons. One, because I care about our shared future. And two, because on a personal note, I think about my three kids. My kids right now are 5, 8, and 10. I turned 38 this year, so my daughter will be my age in 30 years. And I still feel youngish and like I have a lot of life ahead of me. And when I think about the world my kids could inhabit at that 2050 mark, I feel very motivated to try to get it right for them, to make sure that we are mitigating as many of these impacts as possible, and that we are working collaboratively to ensure that we have a shared future for everyone's children. So why am I starting to talk about coming to the table with challenges? I am starting this talk here because we know that in order to meet the challenges that we face, that are big and sticky and complicated and perhaps intractable, that we're going to need to drive an incredible amount of innovation. And I'm starting this talk about coming to the table with challenges because diversity is one of the best ways that we're going to be able to meet those challenges. Our shared collective future is bound with one another. And we know that more diverse teams are more profitable, which our industry partners care about, but they're more profitable because they drive more innovation. They generate more solutions. They're more objective and careful when discussing facts. And so I'm starting off with those challenges because I think regardless of the work that you end up doing, regardless of the role that you want to play in our industry and in our society, we need to make sure that we are building inclusive teams and inclusive cultures because our future is at stake. And if we don't have more people with different backgrounds and abilities and capabilities to pull from to push us to be better innovators, then we're not going to be able to rise to the occasion. And it's not just me who thinks this. A lot of people who are smarter than I am have been looking at the same data and the same trends and the same threats and feeling very compelled that we should be taking action. And so in 2016, the food and agriculture industry came together under the leadership of Juan Luciano, who is the CEO for ADM, as well as former Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, who as early as this week may once again be the Secretary of Agriculture for the United States. And they brought the industry together to think about that 2050 horizon and the incredible challenges that we face, and really knew deep in their bones that one of the best things that we can do to hedge our bets is to try to attract more diversity of thought into our field, that to drive that innovation and solve those really sticky problems, that we need to pull bright minds from more places to join us in that effort. This quote that I have up here from Juan is from Together We Grow's annual meeting last year. And he talked a lot about the challenges that we face and also how much things are changing, the disruption in our industry, the opportunity, what's happening from a technological standpoint, and recognizing that we have no end of opportunity here, but that the best way that we're going to be able to take advantage of the opportunity is through creating teams where we have more people working together from a diversity of backgrounds, perspectives, capabilities, and experiences. And if you have the time, Juan's full interview is on Together We Grow's channel, and I would encourage you to look at his interview. It was very inspiring. So Juan and Secretary Vilsack formed this organization called Together We Grow, which is an industry consortium bringing together partners from industry, from higher education, and NGOs, all to think about how we build the pipeline of talent for the future. Many of you are part of that pipeline of talent and have already decided that you're dedicating yourselves to building more resilient communities when it comes to food and agriculture. Our shared mission is to unite across the industry to build a skilled, diverse, and inclusive workforce. And you can see some of our members here. We have a lot of the major agriculture companies who are at the table. We've just started to really add food and consumer food organizations like Kraft Heinz. We've got a lovely assortment of higher ed partners as well as NGOs who think a lot about how we are exposing young people to our industry and expanding the frame of how young people understand the work that we do. So as I said, we started in 2016. Secretary Vilsack and Juan brought the industry together in Washington, D.C. and said, these are the major threats facing us. What do we want to do? And they decided to not have just one conversation, but to form an organization to keep the industry accountable as we move forward, both towards trying to increase our reach into audiences who maybe don't know that they could find their purposeful careers in our industry, and also to ensure that we are building truly inclusive cultures. And we know we have a lot of work to do on that front. In 2018, Together We Grow released an RFP to higher education institutions to house this effort, to be more of an independent convening body. And Colorado State University won the bid to house this effort. We competed with universities like Cornell and Purdue. And part of the reason that we are home to Together We Grow is because of the redevelopment project that we have in downtown Denver, the CSU Spur campus. And I know many of you know about the Spur campus, but the intention with the Spur campus is to convene the public on issues with global significance around food, water, and health, realizing that all of our futures are indeed bound together and that the challenges we face are big and the solutions are multifaceted. And so we need to be engaging in things in a fairly sophisticated way to solve the challenges of tomorrow. This past year, much of our work has really been focused on racial equity, race, and racism within our industry. Last year, we started by hosting a town hall early in the summer on race and racism with our industry partners, our higher education partners, and our NGOs, and have since launched 4 working groups across our membership. We had a big board meeting today, and we're doing some really systemic work within our industry to address some of these issues. And I'm really excited about the progress that we're making, knowing that we have a very long road ahead of us. None of these things are easy solutions or quick wins. in the interest of time, I'm going to talk about a couple of the models and initiatives that our partners have. I wanted to throw this up here. This is Deloitte's Inclusivity Maturity Model. And just to give you a sense of where the industry feels like we're currently at in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you can see in this model that a level 1 is compliance. So you are compliant from a legal standpoint with laws related to employment and diversity and inclusion. At level 4, you truly have an organization that creates feelings of belonging for all employees. You have shifted your culture and transformed it into a place where people feel seen and valued and celebrated. And when we do this assessment with our industry partners, what we found is that our industry on a whole is at a 2.1. So they're right at that transition point from compliance to really starting to shift into culture change. And so I think that as students think about entering the world, the workforce, particularly when it comes from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint, there are a couple of things that I think are helpful to be mindful of. One is that being able to work on multicultural teams, being able to communicate in a way and listen in a way where you're really valuing other perspectives, where you are open to feedback that is different from your own. All of those things are fundamental skills that are necessary in the workplace of today and will only become more so in the workplace of tomorrow. The second is that I think our industry is in this huge period of disruption. We're in a disruption from a digital standpoint, from a work perspective in terms of the policies about how we work together. And we're also in a huge period of disruption when we think about the way that our organizations want to show up, both for their employees and in their communities. And as young people entering these organizations, I think that you are going to be expected to both have some skills when it comes to being able to work on multicultural teams, and also to be able to be champions of this journey that we're all on and this transformation of our industry to being increasingly inclusive and creating cultures of belonging for people. There's a handful of strategies I want to talk with you about in the few minutes we have before we transition over to our Q&A. And these are a handful of the strategies that our members are currently rolling out across their company and their global footprint. Most of our organizations now are doing a global day or week of belonging. And in those sessions, what they're doing is talking really candidly, really vulnerably, much like the conversation that you guys had earlier with Dean Pritchett and Dean Fisher, that we are showing up as our full selves at work right now. And I think that will only increase. We're showing up with the kids in the background on Zoom and the dog that needs to be let outside right now. But we're also showing up saying, you know, I'm tired. I've been carrying the torch for this, or you're tapping me as the one person of color to do work that is exhausting and isn't part of my job, or that we recognize that we have so far to go and that we're tapping people to do this work in addition to everything else that they have going on, particularly in our industry where we have had so much disruption this past year and have been rethinking supply chains and resilience, and we've had no end of short-term, high-stress issues to solve, protecting essential workers, that in addition to that, really rethinking how we rewrite the social contract within our organizations and within our communities and broader society is a lot to do. And so most of our companies are taking space to shut down operations and to have difficult conversations. We have some that have brought in improv troupes to bring those difficult experiences to life in a more interactive way. But people are really engaging in hard conversations and talking about when we are creating cultures of belonging and when we're not, and how we're going to change that. There's obviously a ton of work happening on policy and planning. That could be a whole different session. I'm just going to pick out one other because I know that we're running on time. but one that I think that anybody who is listening today could do in their life, whether you are a first-year student, whether you are a TA in charge of a classroom, whether you are a tenured faculty member, is that mentorship 35-1. And the mentorship program that some of our companies have adopted, this started at JP Morgan Chase and has then been adopted elsewhere, is a strategy where you look at your classroom, where you look at your cadre of coworkers. And it's really a way to try to give more voice and empower more people to be able to share their brilliance in our teams, in our committees, in our organizations. And so you spend 30 minutes a week having coffee with somebody who you don't know, who's up and coming, learning more about them and just connecting on a human level. Ideally, this is somebody who you're not already mentoring or not already championing. This is somebody who you are making an effort to reach out to and connect. In most of our organizations, this is intentionally focused on either women or underrepresented groups, people of color, people with disabilities, veterans are often the categories, the demographics that our companies are really targeting this mentorship program for. You spend 5 minutes a week recognizing the amazing work that your colleagues have going on, especially I think in the Zoom era. It's hard sometimes, we're all working so hard, and it's hard sometimes to have a sense that people see the value that we're contributing or the work that we're doing. And so those 5 minutes are talking up, recognizing a win that somebody's having, giving somebody a call or sending an email and saying, I saw that you did that and that was amazing. And that 1 minute is talking about somebody to people who they're not always in the room with. And so if you're a TA, that's maybe highlighting a student who has been overcoming something difficult or has just been shining in a really specific way. If you're a faculty member, maybe it's taking an interest in a young faculty member and really making sure that people know about their wins. I think in particular in academia, we're not always wired to create those kind of support networks and the synopses of championing one another. And so this is, I think, a really powerful thing that any of us can do no matter where we are. I would be happy to talk at length about any of these other things, but I know that we're running short on time. And so my main takeaways for all of you is that we have no end of challenges. And because that is true, we need to work together. None of these problems that we face are problems that we can solve on our own. Our futures are tied with one another's futures. And that in order to solve the problems that we face, those existential threats, as well as our own internal challenges around systemic racism, around systemic barriers for people being able to be successful in the workplace, for attracting more diverse talent, for being able to retain more diverse talent. That is the job, not just of HR departments, not just of deans or leaders, not just of hiring committees. That is the job of each of us. We are each the culture makers in our organizations, in our classrooms, in the industry. And so if we want to be sincere about doing this work, it is upon each and every one of us to show up and do our part. I wanted to just let you know, because I think a lot of people who are interested in this work want tangible ways to engage in it. We know that we have a lot of issues, but we want to be able to do something about it. The CSU Vice President's Office for Diversity has no end of resources. I've linked to them here if you have interest in checking them out. They've got no end of training opportunities, books, articles, and so I would definitely encourage you to do that. I know earlier you talked about implicit bias, and certainly I think that bias training is a great place to start, but we need more than that, right? We need to have more than just an awareness of the biases that we have. We need to figure out how to engage in really tangible ways to shift our cultures. The other strategies on this slide are all specific strategies that my members are using to be able to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in their organizations. And so I wanted to put them up here because I think that they're all really worthwhile structures to consider whether you're looking at your volunteer organization or the committees that you're on, or when you find yourself in the workplace in the future. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Kristin. That was a wonderful and very empowering presentation. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to go ahead and dive right into some questions that I have for you that my hope can inform the audience and everyone that's watching and kind of expand on some of the stuff that you spoke about. So first, you finished up with these resources and strategies, but I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more to strategies or things that can be directed towards the collegiate level and specifically students. I myself am a graduate student, and even undergrads and things like that go through this. I think it can be overwhelming to hear about a lot of this, and also look at these strategies and resources and be like, okay, well, I'm only one student. I don't really know where to start. So if you could just offer maybe a piece or two of advice or initiative for students who are just starting out or feeling a little bit overwhelmed with this type of work.
Absolutely. I think a couple things. One, I feel this really acutely when I talk with young people, that I think young people often feel like they've been asked to step in and help solve so many giant problems. And our social contract with one another being foundational to all of them, right? When we look at any of those challenges, how we show up with one another is part of both the additional challenge of solving some of those things and the inequities of outcomes, as well as how we work in the first place with one another. And so for students, I think really, to take concrete action, one, I think that education component is really important. And so I would encourage you to commit with yourself to maybe doing one thing. Start with one thing. And maybe that one thing is taking a look at CSU's VPD's website and deciding that you're going to read one book that maybe makes you feel uncomfortable or pushes you to think differently. Maybe you're going to do one unconscious bias training and take it from there. So I would start small and do one thing so that you don't get overwhelmed. Break it down into tasks. I think it's always helpful to think about what's in your control and what's not in your control. But students have a lot of power. You show up in a lot of spaces. And so I think it's easy to think, well, I'm not the president of the university. I don't make all of the policies. I don't have the same power as other people have. But I think what students do have is so much power and voice in a lot of places. And so I would encourage you to think about the committees that you're on, the organizations that you're involved in, and to lead in those spaces, because you do have more power than you think you do. And students are fundamental in creating the culture of our classrooms. And so the way that we decide to interact with one another, to engage in difficult discussions, to create space for one another, that is also the job of students. And practicing those skills here in a university setting only sets you up to bring those skills to wherever you land next, because you'll be using the same dynamics will exist. And what any of us, I think, are being tapped to do is figuring out how to lead from where we are.
Totally. I think that's really helpful. Focusing on the one thing, especially with the restrictions that we have right now and it being a non-traditional learning environment currently, I think that is a really sound piece of advice. So thank you. My second question for you is relating more towards Together We Grow. So what do you hope is the future behind these efforts, or where do you kind of see this going?
Yeah, we have, like most organizations, both some really short-term things that we are hoping to accomplish, and then also we are a future-leaning organization. So the time horizon that we are trying to solve for is 30 years from now, which I'm thankful for, because we've taken on some really big, difficult topics, and they're not going to be solved in the next 12 months. This year, we just approved one of the things that our agribusiness partners are all working on together is an index to be able to measure their accountability. So most of them have signed on to some of the pledges that you actually see on this slide, Disability In, Paradigm for Parity, which is trying to create gender parity within our leadership levels within this decade, so that we have parity within our boards and our senior leadership suites and our senior leadership teams within this decade, which is a bold goal compared to what the data point to right now. CEO action is another. And we looked at all of these pledges that our partners have committed to, which are words, they're aspirations. And we're saying, yes, we know we need to be doing these things. Yes, we need to be tackling them, but we haven't had a way to track our progress. And so one of the things that we have decided to put resources to is building out an index where we're measuring our progress as an industry and using the aspirational pledges as a way to inform where we need to go next. We at Together We Grow have been monitoring data within the industry. Our industry partners have been voluntarily releasing data on about 300,000 employees. And we have a sense of where we have room for improvement. And this will give us a way to really monitor the way that we're creating cultures of inclusion to try to drive the changes that we're wanting to. A lot of the longer term work, which I think is really exciting, is really around communications and education campaigns, particularly showing up in communities where we haven't often had connections or footprints. For instance, we're currently exploring with NASA a partnership working with high school youth in more urban environments. And I think there's no end of really exciting ways for us to connect with young people. I think that all of you who have found yourselves here in the College of Ag Science at CSU have done so because you guys want to make the world better. That is the specialty of this college. And so I think our challenge is to connect with more diverse young people to help them find themselves and their futures in the work that we're doing, because we need them. We need them to come help us make the world better and more sustainable and more equitable.
Totally. Yeah. Those are great efforts to hear about. So thank you. So now for the sake of time, I want to make sure that people who are putting questions in the chat get their questions answered as well. So it looks like we have 2 that have been posted, and I'll just go ahead and read them and you can answer as you see fit. The first is that students are the first line of change, but how do we plan to increase the amount of diverse students in the industry classrooms?
So I got distracted. I was looking at my friend, Robert Wiggins. Will you read it again? The question is, how are we attracting more diverse students to our classrooms?
This is his question. So
Awesome.
students are the first line of change, but how do we plan to increase the amount of diverse students in the industry classrooms?
I think there's a handful of ways that we're hoping to do this. One, all of our higher ed institutions, I think, are taking this really seriously. And even if you look at CSU specifically, we have a number of initiatives. Our Spur campus, for instance, is really embedded with Denver Public Schools. And we have a number of faculty from this college who are working to create new pathways for students who may not have any connections or ties into agriculture to help them really connect with the work and opportunity within ag. There are programs like our partners at the University of Tennessee are pioneering a new program with the University of Memphis. So the University of Memphis is a college that has incredible STEM disciplines, but no connection into agriculture. It's a very diverse student population. And so the University of Tennessee has partnered with the University of Memphis to try to connect more opportunities into agriculture. I think there's been a really wide shift in terms of some of our more traditional youth serving organizations like FFA and 4-H, who are all really working to think a little bit more holistically about their communities. Manners, I know we've got a Manners chapter here at CSU. They've launched a junior Manners program, really trying to encourage young people of color to have ag experiences. And then a lot of the industry jobs that we need people to come and fill and bring their innovation for are STEM jobs. And so a lot of the work we're doing is connecting through STEM design challenges and really trying to connect with more audiences. And that is, I think, a lot of the work happening across the board.
I'm really glad that you highlighted efforts outside of CSU and Fort Collins or the Colorado area, things like that. I know we have a lot of people from different areas here today, but sometimes we get stuck in the silo of what's just going on here. And so it's encouraging and motivating to hear what's going on at other universities or other communities as well. There is another question. So Robert asks, progression of the industry is a great ideation. In the long haul, are we working on policy to help bring individuals into the community of ag that are interested?
Absolutely. I do really think that, so to your point, when we think about a broader geographic reach, I think that across the board, there is diversified investments, diversified policies, and informal and formal partnerships happening to do exactly that. And so I think there is not an institution at this current moment in time who does not see this as a priority. If any of you watched Secretary Vilsack's comments for his confirmation, this is one of the foundational pillars of what needs to happen. I do not work with a single leader who does not see this as one of the top most important things that we need to be working on. And not just from I need to say the words, but I need to be accountable, I need to take action, and I need to show meaningful change. And I think when we had leaders last year who felt like this was maybe a flash in the pan, it's not. There is only deepening effort and commitment to making sure that we set a table for everyone, but that we go beyond that, that we're really creating cultures of belonging. It's not enough to invite people to sit with us. We need to make sure that they have an equal seat at the table.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have one last question for you. If anybody else has questions, you can feel free to drop them in the chat, or if you're able to turn on your microphone, you're welcome to ask them to Kristin directly. But I'm just really interested and curious to hear, and this can be in your personal experience or in your work, whatever it is, what do you find keeps you hopeful for these types of efforts and the stuff that you're doing in these industries to improve them?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy not to feel hopeful sometimes, right? Especially in a pandemic year when we're all in our homes and looking at the challenges that surround us, because they are unending. I feel hopeful for a couple of reasons. One, working with young people always keeps me hopeful. So whether that is at a college where you see no end of bright minds who have passion and endless ideas and are committed to having purposeful futures, that always gives me hope. Our high school and middle school students whose understanding of the world is so complex, even at such young ages, and their ability to problem solve and innovate and be adaptable. That is the one thing we've all been flexing this year. No matter if you're a kindergartner or you are a CEO, we've all been practicing our skills this year at being adaptable. And that is one of the fundamental things we need in the workforce and that we are being asked to accomplish in our organizations. I think also really young people. So having kids, when I think about the challenges, one, there isn't an option not to figure out how to solve them, right? and two, I think that we have to remain, despite the fact that our challenges can feel overwhelming, there is no end of opportunity, especially if we work together. We are the change makers who get to make it better, right? We all have the opportunity to lead from where we are. And I think that as our challenges become greater, our resolve to solve them does as well, and our willingness to collaborate. My partners, for instance, are competitors. ADM and Cargill are competitors in every single way and are at the table together because they know we can't solve the challenges that we have as individuals, even as individual organizations. And so I think that collaborative spirit is really a source of hope as well.
I agree, and it makes it feel like it's not like we're slated against each other, which I think sometimes a lot of with the competition in the industry that can rear an ugly head. And so in the efforts where it really shouldn't be that way, it's nice to hear that that isn't what's happening and that they are making collaborative efforts. Andrew has a question. Did you want to ask over your mic?
Sure, I think I can figure that out. Hi, Kristin. Great presentation. Thank you. In my department's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee meeting this morning, we were talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion training or curricular elements for both the graduate and undergraduate level. And the discussion was, whether those should be required or not, or whether those should be optional. So I'm interested in your thoughts about that. And then also whether those should be sort of standalone courses or trainings, or whether those should be infusion model, if you will.
Yeah. I think a couple of things. One, we have some partners who have been able, Purdue, for instance, has had a multicultural requirement for their College of Ag for quite a while. And that has been really successful. I think it's a both and. If I had my magic wand, that's what it would be, because I think it's foundational enough. Our students are going to be required to be able to do this in the same way that they're good communicators. And you think about the way that we require communication. You have to take required courses, but you also are required to prove and to flex the muscle for that skill in every course that you have. And these issues are embedded in everything that we do, regardless of the topic, regardless of the focus area. And so I think you've got the opportunity to do both. I think we also have so much work to do, right? That starting somewhere is a good place to start anywhere, and that is progress. And so I am a fan of both. I see another question from Katie about the accountability piece and the mandatory piece. And I think that that really depends on what makes sense for the organization. But certainly we're seeing partners who are exploring with that accountability piece in a lot of ways. And I think the required class is part of that, performance reviews and all of those things. I think there's a lot of ways to embed that accountability so that we move from talking about it to that transformation in culture. I do also know that we are over time. And I would welcome any of these questions. Andrew, I know that you have done so much pioneering work in this space. And so you've got a lot of answers to these questions as well. But you guys have an incredible faculty and staff and student body to lean on. And I'm really excited to see how these efforts move forward for the College of Ag at CSU, because I think there's no end of opportunity and passion and willingness to engage in this work. And so I really thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kristin.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Finally, we'd like to invite Dean Pritchett back to the stage and back to the platform. Thank you both, Kristin and Andrea and team, for such a wonderful presentation. Dean Pritchett.
Hey, I'll add my kudos to Kristin and Andrea for your great work that you just did. I was listening to your conversation and I was jotting notes. I got Post-its full of notes of things that we're thinking of, and the questions from Andrew and from Katie too. It occurred to me, Kristin, that as you talked about, hey, flexing that muscle is an important part of being able to add competencies and being able to demonstrate that. And I think too that what we owe students, and there's a fair number of students that are on this chat right now and video conference, we really owe students is the opportunity to be able to narrate what their muscles can do. Right, and so from a student success perspective, we want to be able to add competencies. We want to be able to practice those, and then be able to narrate them to employers. And I think that's just a terrific thing. I know Michaela wanted to know how student organizations can connect with Together We Grow. Lots of opportunities out there. It's fantastic that you're part of the CSU team, but also fantastic that you're an agent of change, much as Andrea is. So thank you. For everything that you've done for us today. Hey, I want to give a little bit of a thank you too to the planning committee that helped us not only with logistics and organization, but really the ideation around what we do with the Come to the Table events, and give us inspiration for how to do things. It's one of those investments that take place in the background, and really they make things work and help to inspire us, and that's how we move forward on our pathway. We started the discussion today really about a pathway. We said this is the beginning of the beginning, right? That this was an opportunity for us to take advantage and think about where we are. We'd be successful today if we could imagine where we are, and also if we could learn today. And so we had the opportunity to listen to Dean DQ Fields from the University of Arkansas talk about his lived experience and some of the strategies that come to organizations to help them encourage change and be better. I think too that one thing I took from Dean Fields was the urgency around this, that now is the time, and we can make the world better incrementally and in big ways if we do it today. And Kristin reminded us of that too in the presentation that she made as well. So I think that begs the question, right? An important question for us: where do we go from here? What's next for us? Well, before I headed into this administrative position, I was a teacher before then, and I had the opportunity to give assignments. So here is, well, I'm going to share with you some homework, and I hope that we can take this home. For students, one thing that I would say to you, your objective while you have the opportunity is to be able to go out and train those muscles and flex those muscles and invest. And one of the ways you can do that is to participate and engage in some of the great trainings and opportunities that are here. Students, I want you to think about your clubs and organizations right now, the clubs and organizations that you're part of, and think about them through an equity lens. So how do you recruit other students into your organizations? How do you choose the projects and opportunities that you make decisions around? How do you shift your financial resources around? How do you retain the members of your organization? Think about that through an equity lens. And if you have one of these, if you have a set of bylaws or a code that's associated with your club and organization, reach out to Elias Quinones and Addie Elliott, and let's examine that code so that we can find ways that we can help be more inclusive and more equitable in the approach that we take with those bylaws and opportunities. Lots of trainings that are there for your clubs and orgs. Now's a chance to be able to step in there. And related to what Kristin talked to us about, flex those muscles and learn to narrate your commitment to inclusion, diversity, and equity. I think that's so important. I want to recognize too that each committee in a department here on campus, students, each department has a diversity and equity committee around which they're building out objectives. That's a great place for you to be involved as well, and a great group of individuals to talk to. They're really driving a lot of the change and investments that are taking place. So now, students, you can sit back a little bit and look at the faces of some of those other employees and staff and faculty that are on this chat, because what I'd like to do is to share my screen a little bit and give you a sense for what their homework is that we're going to take part in the next little while. So I'm going to share this screen right now and put that up. Everybody can see that, okay? I take it. What this homework looks like for us. This is the unit level homework that I'm giving you. Dean Pritchett is giving to our organizations and our units. The responsible parties are the leaders of the units, but we're all responsible for making sure this is successful. Our objective, as we stated earlier on, was about how we're going to catalyze, model, nurture that inclusive, diverse, and equitable learning, engagement, and research environment. That's what we want to do for the constituents of our organization and model that for folks outside. We do this by thinking about the things that we do in terms of awareness, increasing our internal and external awareness, our investment. Where do we put our passion? Where do we put our knowledge and wisdom? Where do we put our finances? And engagement. We want to make sure that we create a culture of engagement in which we continuously always are intentional about what we do and put inclusiveness and equity at the forefronts. So this homework is really about to gain an understanding of what our opportunities are within our units. It's a little bit like an opportunity analysis or a gap analysis. So what I'd like you to do is to assess the success of those engagement practices that are taking place in your organization now with an eye toward equity. So if your unit is focused on student success, you work interplace with students, assess the success of the engagement that you have with students. What are the ways that you do this in your practices? What are best practices? Where might we be able to do a better job? For units that don't directly engage with those students, I want to encourage you to think about the community within your organization and those outside stakeholders with whom you work, so that your clients, so to speak. So think a little bit about your success in engaging around equity, around inclusion, and around diversity through retaining employees, recruiting employees, and promoting employees. Think about that through an equity lens. How do you do that? And in the relationships that you have with those external audiences. The second part of this homework is really about collecting data. So I'm interested in how we might be able to create a foundation that we can benchmark, see how we do in the future, and also make it actionable for our next steps. So think a little bit about how you can collect data and then develop and measure, create some metrics around those opportunity gaps. If you focus on students, I want you to work with institutional research, the IR group here. And many of you have already begun to do that in identifying the exact gaps that exist in student success. And that would, in particular, let's pay attention to those populations that are underrepresented, or maybe groups around which we think we might be able to make that positive impact when it comes to inclusiveness and diversity and equity. Those metrics can include, but aren't limited to, things like, hey, some pre-enrollment analysis. Who's applying to Colorado State University with our majors in mind? At what rate are they being accepted? How are we getting them financial aid? What does that package look like for them? How many of those individuals are making deposits and eventually coming to CSU? And then thinking about, once we get here, hey, how are we doing in terms of our achievements? So what's our time to graduation? What's our graduation rate? What's our retention rate? What's our placement rate? You can define metrics that you think are important, but those are some that I've picked right off the top. We have lots of help that could help us in that space. Let's go ahead and benchmark what that looks like. I want to encourage you to think about that for units that don't work directly with students, about your employees too. It's time for us to be able to look at that through an equity lens. So let's measure opportunity gaps in recruitment, the numbers of individuals that are interested in our positions, that enter into an application process for a position, that ultimately become part of our team. How do we retain those individuals? How do we promote those individuals? And what does their pay look like over time? So I want you to perform that, collect that data, perform that analysis. Hey, ask for help. We have lots of resources that are available to us. You don't need to do this on your own. And it's important that we do this well. So we'll find those experts for you. We'll make connections. If we have to go collect data, we'll go collect that data alongside one another so that we can do that. A couple of things that I want you to be aware of. There's some hyperlinks that are in this homework document that's going to go out to your unit heads and to your department level committees around diversity and inclusion. That includes the climate survey that we completed in 2018 as a university. And I have copies of that for individual units that we performed as a subgroup of those reports. And also the report that Nita Mosby-Tyler and Caroline Turner did for us that we presented at last year's Come to the Table event. That's the diversity and culture report. That's available to you too. So here's what those expectations are. Unit leaders, you're going to organize this and submit your assessment report. You're going to submit that to me on or before September 6th, 2021. And the reason why is, I mentioned this was the beginning of the beginning. We're going to have a big event in fall of 2021, date to be determined, depending a little bit on what's going on with COVID at that point in time. But a big come to the table event where we'll have the opportunity to be able to present our results to our community and then add some tools to our toolkit about how we inform our next steps, right? So what are the things that we want to do to make those concrete improvements and to hold ourselves accountable for what our expectations are. In between that September 6th date and the come to the table date, I'm going to have those unit leaders actually present a summary of their reports to our leadership team so we have a chance to make sure we're asking the right questions and developing some good strategies. So that's what your homework is. I'm pretty excited about giving my first homework assignment in quite a while and getting back those reports to you. Look forward to working alongside with you. Hey, I just want to leave you with this. This is really important work. And I'm humbled and grateful and even a little emotional about how many of you want to engage intentionally and authentically in this space. We can do this together. We can come together, we can invite others, and we can bring our passion and we can make a difference. So let's start doing that. Let's start doing that today. Hey, keep up your good work. Thank you for what you've done today. And thank you for what we're going to do together going forward. Be safe, everybody.